When a mother begged a lone cowboy to take her starving children and leave her behind to die, he gave an answer that shattered everything she thought she knew about survival, sacrifice, and what it truly means to be chosen. If you want to see how a desperate woman and two fading children found something stronger than rescue on a blistering summer trail, stay with me until the very end, and when you do, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The sky had no mercy. It stretched overhead like a sheet of hammered copper, bright and brutal, pressing heat down onto the land until the earth cracked beneath it. No clouds, no wind, just the sun, relentless and high, turning the air to something you had to fight to breathe. Elena Brooks stood at the edge of the abandoned rail stop, one hand gripping the splintered post that once held a station sign, the other shielding her eyes as she stared down the empty tracks. The metal rails shimmered in the heat, bending the horizon into a wavering mirage. Nothing moved. No train, no wagon, no rider, nothing but dust and silence. Behind her, slumped against a broken crate in the thin slice of shade it offered, were her children. Lily, 6 years old, sat with her knees pulled to her chest, her face flushed and damp. Thomas, barely 4, lay with his head in his sister's lap, eyes half closed, lips cracked and pale. Elena's throat tightened as she looked at them. They hadn't spoken in over an hour. Hadn't asked for water, though she knew they were desperate for it. The canteen had run dry before dawn, and the last creek they'd passed had been nothing but sun-baked stone and dust. She turned back to the tracks, her chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. They'd been waiting since first light. A man at the last settlement, a hard-eyed storekeeper who'd barely looked at her, had said a supply wagon sometimes came through this route. Sometimes. That was the word he'd used, his tone making it clear he didn't care whether it came or not. Elena had believed him because she had no other choice. But the sun was high now, well past noon, and the wagon hadn't come. Neither had anyone else. She pressed her palm to her forehead, trying to steady herself against the dizziness creeping in at the edges of her vision. Her dress clung to her back, soaked through with sweat, and her legs trembled beneath her skirts. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. Yesterday, maybe. A handful of dried beans she'd saved for the children, but couldn't bring herself to watch them chew alone. A soft whimper pulled her attention back. Lily was trying to wake Thomas, her small hand patting his cheek. "Tommy," she whispered, her voice thin and cracked. "Tommy, please." The boy stirred but didn't open his eyes. Elena moved quickly, dropping to her knees beside them. The ground scorched through her skirts, but she ignored it, her hands reaching for Thomas. His skin was hot to the touch, too hot, and when she pressed her fingers to his wrist, his pulse felt faint and erratic. "Thomas," she said, her voice sharper now, edged with fear. "Thomas, look at me." His eyelids fluttered, and for a moment his gaze found hers, glassy and unfocused. Then his head lolled to the side. Lily's breath hitched. "Mama, is he—" "He's all right," Elena said quickly, though the words felt like ash in her mouth. She brushed the damp hair from Thomas's forehead, her hands shaking. "He just needs water and rest. He'll be all right." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. They wouldn't survive another night out here. Maybe not even another hour. Elena pulled Thomas into her arms, cradling him against her chest as she rose unsteadily to her feet. Lily stood too, her thin frame swaying, and reached for her mother's skirt with one trembling hand. "Where are we going?" Lily asked. Elena didn't answer. She didn't know. She scanned the horizon again, searching for anything, smoke from a distant chimney, movement along the ridgeline, the outline of a building. But there was nothing. Just the endless stretch of dry land, broken only by scattered sage and the skeletal remains of a fence that had long since given up its purpose. Her vision blurred and she blinked hard, forcing herself to focus. She couldn't fall apart. Not now. Not when Lily was watching her with those wide, trusting eyes, waiting for her mother to fix this the way she always had before. But Elena didn't know how to fix this. She had left everything behind to get here. What little they'd had after the fever took her husband, after the landlord took the house, after every door in town closed in her face. She'd believed the promises of work in the Western territories, believed the rumors of new settlements where people didn't ask questions, and a woman could start over if she was willing to work hard enough. She'd believed because she'd had to, and now she stood in the middle of nowhere with 2 children who wouldn't last the day, and no one was coming. Elena's knees buckled, and she sank back down to the ground, still holding Thomas. Lily crouched beside her, pressing close, and Elena wrapped one arm around her daughter's shoulders, pulling her in tight. "Mama," Lily whispered, "I'm scared." "I know, sweetheart." Elena's voice broke, but she forced herself to keep talking, to fill the silence with something other than the roar of panic building in her chest. "I know, but we're going to be all right. Someone will come. Someone has to come." Lily nodded, but her eyes told a different story. She was too young to understand the full weight of what was happening, but old enough to know when her mother was lying. The sun crawled higher. Time became something strange and distorted, measured only by the shifting shadows and the burn in Elena's throat. She tried to keep Thomas awake, murmuring his name, stroking his cheek, but his responses grew weaker. Lily had stopped asking questions. She sat silent and still, her head resting against Elena's shoulder, her breathing shallow. Elena's thoughts began to drift, slipping into dark, desperate places she didn't want to go. What if no one came? What if this was where it ended, not in violence or tragedy, but in slow, quiet surrender beneath an indifferent sky? She thought of her husband, buried in a nameless grave back east. She thought of the promises she'd made to him in his final hours, that she would protect their children, that she would keep them safe no matter what. She was failing. The realization settled over her like a weight, heavy and suffocating. She had dragged her children across half the country, chasing a dream that didn't exist, and now they were going to die because of it. Unless. The thought came unbidden, cold and sharp, cutting through the haze in her mind. Unless she let them go. Elena's breath caught. She looked down at Thomas, barely conscious in her arms, then at Lily, slumped against her side. If someone came, if anyone came, they wouldn't take all 3 of them. A lone traveler, maybe a trader or a rancher, wouldn't burden themselves with a woman and 2 children. But a child alone? Small, quiet, easy to manage? They might take one, maybe even both. Elena's stomach twisted, bile rising in her throat, but she couldn't push the thought away. If it meant her children lived, if it meant they had water and food and a chance at something more than this, could she do it? Could she beg a stranger to take them and leave her behind? The question burned, but she already knew the answer. She would. She would give them up if it meant they survived. The sound of hooves on stone broke through the stillness. Elena's head snapped up, her heart lurching. For a moment she thought she'd imagined it, another cruel trick of the heat. But then she heard it again, clearer this time. The steady rhythm of a horse moving at an easy walk somewhere beyond the ridge. She struggled to her feet, still clutching Thomas, her pulse pounding in her ears. Lily scrambled up beside her, gripping her mother's skirt. A rider appeared over the rise. He was alone, sitting tall in the saddle on a bay horse that looked strong and well-fed. Dust clung to his clothes, and a wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face. But even from a distance, Elena could see the ease in his posture, the way he moved with the horse as if they were one. He wasn't in a hurry. Elena's breath came fast and shallow as she watched him approach. Relief and terror tangled together in her chest, so fierce she thought she might collapse under the weight of it. This was her chance. Her only chance. The rider slowed as he neared the rail stop, his gaze sweeping over the scene, the broken crate, the empty tracks, the woman standing in the sun with 2 children who looked more like ghosts than living things. He reined in a few yards away and dismounted in one smooth motion, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. For a moment, he just stood there, studying them with eyes that were sharp and unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady, roughened by wind and dust. "You waiting for someone?" Elena opened her mouth, but no words came. Her throat was too dry, her thoughts too scattered. She tried to swallow, tried to force something out, but all that emerged was a choked sound that barely resembled speech. The man's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. He took a step closer, his gaze moving from Elena to the children in her arms. "When's the last time you had water?" he asked. Elena shook her head, the motion jerky and uncoordinated. "I don't this morning. No, Yesterday, I think. The man's jaw tightened. He turned back to his horse and pulled a canteen from his saddle, then crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. Here, he said, holding it out. Elena stared at it, her hands frozen. She didn't trust herself to reach for it, didn't trust that it was real. The man's voice softened, just a fraction. Take it. She did, her fingers trembling as they closed around the cool metal. She brought it to Thomas's lips first, tilting it carefully, letting a few drops slide into his mouth. He coughed, then swallowed, his eyes fluttering open. Slow, the man said. Not too much at once. Elena nodded, her vision blurring with tears she didn't have the moisture to shed. She gave Thomas another small sip, then passed the canteen to Lily, who drank with desperate gulping breaths. When Lily finished, the man took the canteen back and offered it to Elena. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to her children. They'll get more, he said. Drink. She did, and the water was cool and clean, the most beautiful thing she'd ever tasted. It eased the fire in her throat, steadied the tremor in her hands, and for the first time in hours, she felt like she could breathe. When she lowered the canteen, the man was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What are you doing out here? He asked. Elena's breath hitched. We were waiting for a wagon. A supply run. Someone said it came through this way. The man's mouth pressed into a thin line. Not in summer. Route's too dry. No one runs it this time of year. The words hit her like a blow. Elena swayed, and the man's hand shot out, steadying her by the elbow. Easy, he said. She pulled back, her pride flaring even through the exhaustion. We'll be all right. We just need... You won't make it another mile, he said bluntly. Not in this heat. Not without water. Elena looked down at her children. Lily was staring up at the stranger with wide eyes, and Thomas had gone still again, his head resting against her chest. The man crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with Lily. You hungry? He asked. Lily nodded, her voice small. Yes, sir. He pulled a strip of dried meat from his pack and handed it to her. Chew it slow. Then he rose and turned his attention back to Elena. His eyes were gray, she realized. Storm cloud gray, sharp and unrelenting. Where are you headed? He asked. West, Elena said. There's supposed to be work, settlements. I thought... You thought wrong, he said, but there was no cruelty in his tone, just fact. Nearest town's 2 days' ride from here. You won't make it on foot. Elena's chest tightened. Then what am I supposed to do? The man was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between her and the children. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. You got anyone? Family? Someone expecting you? No. He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. Then he straightened, his hand resting on the pommel of his saddle. All right, he said. Here's what's going to happen. I'm taking you to my place. It's half a day's ride, maybe less if we push. You'll get water, food, and a place to rest. After that, we'll figure out what comes next. Elena stared at him, her mind struggling to process the words. You're taking us? All 3 of you, he said, unless you've got a better plan. She didn't, and they both knew it. But even as relief flooded through her, sharp and overwhelming, a different fear took root. She didn't know this man, didn't know what he wanted, what he expected in return. As if reading her thoughts, the man's expression hardened. I'm not asking for anything, he said, and I'm not giving you a choice. Your kids won't survive the night out here, and you know it. So you're coming with me. Elena's throat closed. She wanted to argue, wanted to cling to whatever shred of control she had left. But when she looked down at Thomas, pale and limp in her arms, she knew there was no argument to make. All right, she whispered. The man nodded once, then moved to his horse. He swung into the saddle with practiced ease, then reached down. Hand him up, he said, gesturing to Thomas. Elena hesitated, her arms tightening around her son. I'll keep him steady, the man said. You can walk beside us. But he can't make it on foot, and neither can you if you're carrying him. She knew he was right. Slowly, reluctantly, she lifted Thomas up. The man took him carefully, settling the boy in front of him on the saddle, one arm wrapped securely around his small frame. What's his name? The man asked. Thomas, Elena said. The man looked down at the boy, his expression softening just a fraction. You're all right now, Thomas, he said quietly. Just hold on. Then he turned to Lily. Can you walk? Lily nodded, though her legs trembled. Stay close to your mama, he said. We'll stop if you need to rest. He nudged the horse forward, and Elena fell into step beside them, one hand resting on the saddle to keep herself steady. Lily walked on her other side, her small fingers gripping Elena's skirt. They moved in silence, the sun still high and merciless overhead. But for the first time in days, Elena felt something other than despair. She didn't know this man, didn't know what waited at the end of this trail. But for now, they were moving. And that was enough. The land stretched out in all directions, vast and unforgiving. Sage dotted the hillsides, their silver-green leaves brittle in the heat, and the only sound was the soft crunch of the horse's hooves on dry earth. Elena kept her eyes on Thomas, watching the rise and fall of his chest, the way his head rested against the man's arm. The stranger held him with a steadiness that surprised her, gentle but firm, as if he'd done this before. After a while, the man spoke without looking back. Name's Caleb, he said. Caleb Turner. Elena swallowed. Elena Brooks. And this is Lily. Caleb nodded, acknowledging the introduction, but said nothing more. The silence returned, but it felt different now. Less empty. Less hostile. Elena's legs burned with every step, and her vision swam at the edges, but she kept moving. Lily stumbled once, and Caleb slowed the horse immediately, giving the girl time to catch her breath before they continued. How much farther? Elena asked, her voice hoarse. Couple more hours, Caleb said. There's a creek ahead. We'll stop there. Elena nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed him. Everything felt like a mirage now, the water, the promise of shelter, the man himself. But she kept walking, because what else could she do? But the creek appeared as Caleb had promised, a thin ribbon of water cutting through a shallow ravine where cottonwoods offered the first real shade Elena had seen in days. The trees were sparse and wind-beaten, their leaves rustling with a sound like whispered secrets, but to Elena they looked like salvation. Caleb dismounted in one fluid motion, still cradling Thomas against his chest. The boy stirred slightly, his eyelids fluttering but not quite opening. Elena's heart clenched at the sight of him so pale and still, but at least he was breathing. That was something. That had to be enough. Sit, Caleb said, nodding toward a flat rock near the water's edge. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to help, but her legs gave out before she could form the words. She sank onto the rock, pulling Lily down beside her, and watched as Caleb knelt by the creek with Thomas in his arms. He wet his hand in the cool water and pressed it gently to the boy's forehead, his movements careful and deliberate. Thomas's eyes opened, unfocused and glassy, and Caleb spoke to him in a voice so low Elena almost couldn't hear it. That's it. You're all right, just need to cool down. He cupped water in his palm and brought it to Thomas's lips. The boy drank weakly, coughing once, then again. Caleb waited, patient, then offered more. This time Thomas swallowed without coughing, and some of the tension in Caleb's shoulders eased. Elena found herself staring at this stranger who held her son with such unexpected tenderness. His hands were rough and scarred, the hands of a man who'd spent his life working hard ground in harder weather, but they moved with a gentleness that made her throat tight. He'll be all right, Caleb said, glancing up at her. Once we get some water in him and get him out of this heat. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Caleb carried Thomas over and settled him in the shade beside Lily, then returned to the creek and filled his canteen. He brought it back and handed it to Elena. Drink slow, he said, and get some water on your face and neck. You're burning up. She did as he said, the water blessedly cool against her sun-scorched skin. Lily drank next, then splashed water on her arms and face with a small sigh of relief that made Elena's chest ache. Caleb crouched beside them, his gaze moving over the children with an assessing eye that spoke of experience. When's the last time they ate? Yesterday morning, Elena said quietly. Some dried beans. That was all I had left. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't comment. He pulled jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag, breaking the hardtack into smaller pieces and handing them to the children. Chew it good, he told them. Your stomach's not used to food right now. Go slow or you'll be sick. Lily took the food with trembling hands and whispered, "Thank you." Caleb's expression softened slightly. "You're welcome." Thomas was still too weak to eat much, but he managed a few bites before his eyes drifted closed again. Elena pulled him into her lap, cradling him close, and felt the fragile rise and fall of his breathing against her chest. Caleb stood and moved to his horse, checking the saddle and adjusting the cinch with practiced efficiency. Elena watched him work, her mind spinning with questions she didn't know how to ask. Finally, she found her voice. "Why are you doing this?" Caleb paused, his hand resting on the saddle. For a long moment he didn't answer, his gaze fixed on something in the distance she couldn't see. "Because someone did it for me once," he said finally. "Long time ago." Elena waited, sensing there was more, but Caleb didn't elaborate. He finished with the horse and turned back to face her, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. "We'll rest here another 10 minutes, he said. "Then we need to move. I want to reach the ranch before dark." "How far is it?" Elena asked. 3 hours, maybe 4. Depends on how fast we can move." His gaze dropped to Thomas. "Can he ride?" "I don't know," Elena said honestly. "He's so weak." "I'll carry him," Caleb said. "You and your daughter can ride. Horse can handle it for a few hours." Elena's eyes widened. "I can walk. You don't have to—" "You can barely stand," Caleb said bluntly. "And your daughter's about to collapse. You'll ride." There was no room for argument in his tone, and Elena found she didn't have the strength to fight him anyway. She nodded, defeated and grateful in equal measure. They rested in the shade while the worst heat of the day pressed down around them. Lily dozed against Elena's shoulder, and Thomas lay quiet and still in her arms. Caleb sat a few feet away, his back against a cottonwood trunk, his hat pulled low over his eyes. Elena studied him when she thought he wasn't looking. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 35, with the kind of lean, weathered build that came from years of hard labor. His clothes were worn but well-maintained, and his boots, though dusty, were good quality. Not a rich man, but not destitute either, a working man who took care of what he had. "You live alone?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Caleb tilted his hat back and met her gaze. "Yeah." "No family?" "Not anymore." His tone didn't invite further questions, and Elena fell silent. After a moment, Caleb stood and moved to the horse, gathering the reins. "Time to go." He helped Elena into the saddle first, his hand steady on her waist as he lifted her up with surprising ease. Then he handed Lily up to sit in front of her mother, the girl's small body fitting against Elena's chest. Thomas he kept with him, cradling the boy against his shoulder as he led the horse by the reins. They moved out of the ravine and back onto the open trail, the sun still fierce, but beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon. The landscape shifted gradually as they traveled, the flat scrubland giving way to rolling hills dotted with juniper and pine. The air grew slightly cooler, or maybe that was just Elena's exhausted mind playing tricks on her. Lily's head drooped against Elena's chest, and she felt the girl's breathing even out into sleep. Elena wrapped her arms more tightly around her daughter and tried to stay upright in the saddle, though her own exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. Caleb walked steadily ahead, never faltering, Thomas secure in his arms. Every so often he would glance back to check on them, his expression unreadable. "How long have you lived out here?" Elena asked, needing to fill the silence with something other than her own spiraling thoughts. 10 years, give or take. "Where did you come from? Before, I mean." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Kansas. Had a farm there with my brother and his family." Elena heard the past tense, heard the weight behind it. "What happened?" "Drought," Caleb said simply. "Then sickness. Lost most of the herd, then lost the land. My brother's wife and their 2 girls died in the fever that followed. My brother—" He paused, his jaw working. "He didn't last long after that." Elena's breath caught. "I'm sorry." Caleb shrugged, the gesture stiff. "Was a long time ago." But Elena understood grief didn't work that way. Time didn't erase it, just taught you how to carry it differently. She knew that too well. "My husband died 2 years ago," she said quietly. "Same thing," Fever swept through our town. He was strong one day, gone 3 days later. Caleb glanced back at her, his expression softening slightly. That's hard. It was. It is. Elena looked down at Lily, sleeping against her. The landlord took our house 6 months later. Said I couldn't pay the rent without a husband's income. I worked. I tried. But no one would hire a woman with 2 small children. They said I'd be unreliable. Distracted. So you came west, Caleb said. I heard there were new settlements. That they needed workers. Didn't care if you were a man or a woman as long as you could pull your weight. She laughed bitterly. Guess I should have asked more questions before I spent the last of my money on train fare. You didn't know, Caleb said. Can't blame yourself for that. But Elena did blame herself. She blamed herself for believing rumors, for dragging her children into this God-forsaken wilderness, for nearly getting them killed chasing a dream that didn't exist. The settlements are real, Caleb said after a moment, but they're rough, and they don't take kindly to newcomers without skills or resources. You would have had a hard time even if you'd made it there. Elena's heart sank. So what do I do? Caleb stopped walking and turned to face her fully. His gray eyes were steady, serious. First, you rest. Get your strength back. Get your kids healthy. Then we figure out what comes next. You can't just take care of us, Elena said, her voice tight with shame. We're strangers. You don't owe us anything. I know that, Caleb said. But your kids didn't ask for this. They didn't choose to be out here. And I'm not the kind of man who walks away from children in trouble. The conviction in his voice left no room for argument. Elena swallowed hard, torn between gratitude and the crushing weight of her own helplessness. They continued on in silence, the sun sinking lower, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. The hills grew steeper, the trail narrower, winding between rocky outcroppings and stands of pine that smelled sharp and clean. Thomas stirred against Caleb's chest, whimpering softly. Caleb adjusted his hold, murmuring something Elena couldn't hear, and the boy settled again. He trusts you, Elena said softly. Caleb glanced at Thomas, something unreadable crossing his face. Kids are good judges of character, better than most adults. Elena wondered what Thomas saw in this quiet, steady man that made him feel safe, what Lily would see when she woke, what Elena herself should see. The trail climbed higher, following a ridge that overlooked a wide valley below. As they crested the rise, Caleb stopped and nodded toward the valley. There, he said, that's home. Elena followed his gaze and saw it, a small ranch nestled in a clearing where the valley opened up. A cabin, modest but solid-looking, with a stone chimney and a covered porch, a barn and a corral, a few outbuildings, and beyond them, open pasture where cattle grazed in the fading light. It wasn't much, but after days of dust and emptiness, it looked like paradise. It's beautiful, Elena whispered. Caleb's mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile. It's home. They started down the slope, the horse picking its way carefully over the loose stone. The descent took longer than Elena expected, the trail switchbacking down the hillside in a series of tight turns that made her grip the saddle horn with white knuckles. Caleb never rushed, never pushed. He moved with the same patient steadiness he'd shown since the moment he'd found them, his focus entirely on getting them down safely. By the time they reached the valley floor, the sun had dropped below the western peaks, casting long shadows across the land. The air cooled quickly, and Elena felt Lily shiver against her. Almost there, Caleb said, his voice carrying back to them. True to his word, they reached the cabin just as the last light faded from the sky. Caleb tied the horse to a post near the porch and turned to help Elena down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, and Caleb caught her by the elbow, steadying her. Easy, he said. You've been on that horse for hours. Give yourself a minute. Elena nodded, leaning against the saddle until her legs remembered how to hold her weight. Caleb lifted Lily down next, the girl waking slightly and blinking in confusion. Where are we? Lily asked, her voice small. Somewhere safe, Elena said, smoothing her daughter's hair. Mr. Turner's home. Lily looked up at Caleb with wide, solemn eyes. He met her gaze and nodded once, then turned his attention to Thomas, still unconscious in his arms. Let's get them inside, he said. The cabin was simple but well kept. One main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and a narrow staircase leading to a loft above. A door on the far wall led to what Elena assumed was a bedroom. Caleb carried Thomas to a low cot near the fireplace and laid him down gently, then moved to the hearth and began building a fire with quick, efficient movements. Within minutes, flames crackled to life, filling the room with warmth and light. Elena stood uncertainly in the doorway, Lily pressed against her side, unsure what to do or where to go. Caleb glanced at her as he hung a kettle over the fire. "Sit," he said, nodding toward the table. "I'll get some food started." "I can help," Elena said quickly. "You can sit," Caleb repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You're dead on your feet, and your daughter needs you steady, not collapsed on my floor." Elena's pride flared, but she was too exhausted to fight. She sank into one of the chairs, pulling Lily onto her lap, and watched as Caleb moved around the cabin with the ease of long practice. He pulled bread and cheese from a cupboard, sliced both with a knife he kept sharp, and set them on the table along with a jar of preserved peaches. Then he filled 2 tin cups with water from a pitcher and placed them in front of Elena and Lily. "Eat," he said, slow, like before. Lily reached for the bread with trembling hands, and Elena helped her break off small pieces. The food was simple, but after days of nothing, it tasted like a feast. Caleb knelt beside the cot where Thomas lay and checked the boy's forehead, his expression thoughtful. "Fever's breaking," he said. "That's good. He just needs rest now." Elena's chest loosened slightly. "Are you sure?" "I've seen enough fevers to know," Caleb said. He stood and moved to the cupboard again, this time pulling down a small tin. "I'll make some willow bark tea. It'll help bring the fever down the rest of the way." He worked quietly, steeping the bark in hot water from the kettle, then brought the cup over to the cot. He lifted Thomas carefully, supporting the boy's head, and coaxed him to take small sips. Thomas's eyes opened briefly, glassy and confused, but he drank without protest. Elena watched, her throat tight, as this stranger cared for her son with a gentleness that made her want to weep. When Thomas had drunk enough, Caleb laid him back down and covered him with a wool blanket. Then he returned to the table and poured himself a cup of coffee from a pot that had been warming by the fire. He sat across from Elena, his hands wrapped around the cup, and met her gaze. "You'll stay here tonight," he said. "You and your kids. Tomorrow we'll see where they're at, and we'll talk about what comes next." Elena nodded, the words she wanted to say tangling in her throat. Finally she managed, "Thank you. I don't know how to—" "You don't need to," Caleb said quietly. "Just take care of your kids. That's enough." Lily had finished eating and was half asleep against Elena's shoulder. Caleb stood and gestured toward the door on the far wall. "That's my room. You and your daughter can sleep there tonight. I'll take the loft." "We can't take your bed," Elena protested. "You can and you will," Caleb said. "Loft's fine for me. Used to sleep up there all the time before I built the addition." Elena wanted to argue, but the exhaustion was too heavy, pressing down on her until she could barely think straight. She nodded, defeated, and stood with Lily in her arms. Caleb opened the door to the bedroom, revealing a small, neat space with a double bed covered in a simple quilt. A washstand stood in the corner, and a window looked out over the darkened valley. "There's water in the pitcher," Caleb said, "and clean rags if you need them. I'll be out here if you need anything." Elena carried Lily into the room and laid her on the bed. The girl's eyes were already closed, her breathing deep and even. Elena sat beside her for a moment, smoothing her hair, then turned back to find Caleb still standing in the doorway. "Mr. Turner," she said softly, "I don't know why you're doing this, but thank you. Truly." Caleb's expression was unreadable in the dim light. "Get some rest, Mrs. Brooks. We'll talk in the morning." He pulled the door closed, leaving Elena alone in the quiet darkness. She stood there for a long moment, her mind spinning, her body aching with exhaustion. Then she moved to the washstand and poured water into the basin, scrubbing the dust and sweat from her face and arms with shaking hands. When she finally lay down beside Lily, pulling the quilt over them both, she thought she wouldn't be able to sleep. Her mind was too full, her nerves too raw. But the moment her head touched the pillow, darkness pulled her under like a stone sinking into deep water. In the main room, Caleb sat by the fire, his coffee long gone cold. He stared into the flames, his thoughts far away, remembering another summer, another trail, another desperate soul he'd met when hope had run dry. He'd been 17, half dead from thirst and fever, stumbling through country he didn't know after his horse had thrown him and bolted. He'd made it 3 days before he collapsed beside a dried-up creek bed, certain he was going to die there. But he hadn't. A trapper had found him, an old man with a face like cracked leather and eyes that saw everything. He'd given Caleb water, food, and a place by his fire. He'd asked for nothing in return. And when Caleb had recovered enough to travel, the old man had pointed him toward the nearest settlement and sent him on his way with a full canteen and a piece of advice Caleb had never forgotten. When you got the chance to help someone who can't help themselves, you do it. You don't ask what's in it for you. You don't count the cost. You just do it. Because someday, someone might do the same for you. Or for someone you love. Caleb had never forgotten those words. And he'd never forgotten the man who'd saved his life for no reason other than it was the right thing to do. He looked over at the cot where Thomas slept, the boy's breathing steady now, the fever broken. Then his gaze moved to the closed bedroom door, behind which Elena and Lily rested. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, didn't know what Elena would decide or what he could offer that would make a difference in the long run. But tonight, they were safe. Tonight, they had food and water and a roof over their heads. And that was enough. Caleb stood, banked the fire, and climbed the ladder to the loft. The space was cramped and the mattress thin, but he'd slept in worse places. As he stretched out and closed his eyes, his last thought before sleep took him was simple and clear. He'd made the right choice, and he'd do it again. Elena woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, the scent so unexpected and familiar that for a moment she thought she was dreaming. But when she opened her eyes, she saw morning light filtering through the window, soft and golden, and heard the quiet sounds of someone moving in the next room. She sat up carefully, her body aching from days of travel and too little food, and looked down at Lily still sleeping beside her. The girl's face was peaceful, her breathing steady, and some of the hollowness had left her cheeks. Elena's chest tightened with relief so sharp it hurt. She rose slowly, her legs unsteady, and moved to the washstand. The water in the pitcher was fresh, and she used it to clean her face and hands, trying to make herself presentable. Her dress was wrinkled and stained with dust and sweat, but there was nothing to be done about that now. When she opened the bedroom door, she found Caleb at the stove, turning bacon in a cast-iron skillet. He glanced up as she entered, his expression neutral. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's on the table." "Thank you." Elena moved to the table and poured herself a cup, the warmth seeping into her hands as she wrapped them around the tin. She took a sip and closed her eyes, savoring it. Caleb set a plate of bacon and eggs on the table, then added a stack of cornbread still warm from the oven. "Eat," he said. "Your daughter, too, when she wakes." Elena looked at the food, then at him. "This is too much. You don't have to—" "I'm feeding you," Caleb said simply, not negotiating. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could manage without charity, but her stomach betrayed her with a low growl. Caleb's mouth twitched, almost a smile, and Elena felt her face heat. "All right," she said quietly. She ate slowly, forcing herself not to rush despite the gnawing hunger. The food was simple but good, cooked with care, and each bite settled something restless inside her. Caleb moved to the cot where Thomas still slept and checked the boy's forehead with the back of his hand. "Fever's gone," he said. "He'll be hungry when he wakes." "Is he all right?" Elena asked, her voice tight. "He's fine. Just needs rest and food. Kids bounce back quick once they're out of danger." Elena nodded, relief washing through her again. She looked over at her son, so small and fragile beneath the blanket, and felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back quickly, not wanting Caleb to see, but when she glanced up, she found him watching her with an expression that was almost gentle. "He's tough," Caleb said. "Both your kids are. They wouldn't have made it this far otherwise." "They shouldn't have had to," Elena said, her voice breaking. "This is my fault. I did this to them." "You did what you thought was right," Caleb said. "Can't fault yourself for that. I nearly got them killed." "But you didn't." Caleb's tone was firm. "You kept them alive long enough to find help." That's what matters. Elena wanted to believe him, but the guilt sat heavy in her chest, crushing and relentless. She looked down at her hands, gripping the coffee cup like a lifeline. Caleb returned to the stove and poured himself more coffee, then leaned against the counter, his gaze steady on her. "What were you planning to do when you got to the settlements?" he asked. Elena hesitated. "Find work. Any work. I can clean, cook, mend clothes. I thought maybe a boarding house or a hotel would take me on. With 2 kids in tow?" "I know it's not ideal," Elena said defensively. "But I didn't have a choice. I had to try something." Caleb nodded slowly. "The settlements aren't what you think. Most of them are rough mining camps or logging outfits. Hard men doing hard work. Not many families, not many women." Elena's heart sank. "So there's no work?" "I didn't say that," Caleb said. "But it's not safe. Not for a woman alone with children. You'd have been in worse trouble than you were at that rail stop." "Then what am I supposed to do?" Elena's voice rose, edged with desperation. "I can't go back. There's nothing to go back to. And I can't just stay here and be a burden to you." "You're not a burden," Caleb said quietly. "I am. We are. You're feeding us, sheltering us, taking care of my sick child. We're strangers. You owe us nothing. I know that. Then why are you doing this?" The question came out sharper than she intended, but she was too exhausted and overwhelmed to soften it. "Why did you stop? Why didn't you just ride past us like everyone else?" Caleb was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. "Because I've been where your kids are, desperate, dying, left behind." Elena stared at him, her breath catching. "I was 17, Caleb continued, his gaze distant. "Got thrown from my horse in the middle of nowhere. Fever set in. I thought I was done. But a man found me. An old trapper. He didn't know me, didn't owe me anything, but he gave me water, food, a place to rest. He saved my life." "What happened to him?" Elena asked softly. "Don't know. Never saw him again after he sent me on my way, but I never forgot what he said." Caleb met her gaze, his gray eyes intense. He said, "When you have the chance to help someone who can't help themselves, you do it. You don't ask what's in it for you, you just do it." Elena's throat tightened. "So this is about paying a debt?" "No," Caleb said. "This is about doing what's right." Before Elena could respond, a small voice broke the silence. "Mama?" She turned to see Lily standing in the doorway of the bedroom, her hair mussed from sleep, her eyes wide and uncertain. "Good morning, sweetheart," Elena said, opening her arms. Lily ran to her and Elena pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her daughter's hair. "Where are we?" Lily asked, looking around the cabin. "We're at Mr. Turner's home," Elena said. "Remember? He brought us here yesterday." Lily's gaze moved to Caleb, and she studied him with the solemn intensity only children possess. "You gave us water," she said. "I did," Caleb said. "And food." "That too." "Why?" Caleb crouched down to her level, his expression softening. "Because you needed it." Lily considered this, then nodded as if it made perfect sense. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Caleb stood and gestured to the table. "You hungry?" Lily nodded vigorously, and Elena couldn't help but smile. Whatever else had been broken or lost, her daughter's appetite was intact. Caleb fixed Lily a plate, and she ate with the single-minded focus of a child who'd been too hungry for too long. Elena watched her, then glanced at Thomas, still sleeping peacefully on the cot. "Should I wake him?" she asked. "Let him rest," Caleb said. "He'll wake when he's ready." They fell into a companionable silence, broken only by the sounds of Lily eating and the crackle of the fire. Elena found herself studying Caleb when she thought he wasn't looking, trying to make sense of this quiet man who'd upended everything she thought she understood about survival and kindness. After a while, Caleb stood and moved to the door. "I've got work to do, cattle to check, fences to mend. You're welcome to rest or move about as you like. There's more food in the cupboard if you need it." "Can I help?" Elena asked, standing. "I'm not helpless. I can work." Caleb turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "You can barely stand. You need rest." "I need to be useful," Elena said, her voice tight. "I can't just sit here while you do everything." Caleb studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. But if you start to falter, you stop. Deal? Deal. He handed her a bucket. Water needs hauling from the creek. Think you can manage that? Elena took the bucket, her pride stinging but her determination intact. I can manage. She left Lily at the table with strict instructions to stay inside and watch Thomas, then followed Caleb out into the morning light. The air was cool and fresh, the sky a deep, cloudless blue. The valley stretched out before her, green and alive in a way the dusty plains had not been, and for the first time in days, Elena felt like she could breathe. The creek ran clear and cold about 100 yards from the cabin, winding through a stand of aspens whose leaves whispered in the breeze. Elena knelt at the edge and filled the bucket, the water so cold it made her fingers ache. When she stood, the weight of the bucket pulled at her arms, and she realized just how weak she still was. But she gritted her teeth and started back toward the cabin, determined not to prove Caleb right. She made it halfway before her legs began to shake. She set the bucket down, breathing hard, and wiped sweat from her forehead. Told you to stop if you needed to? Elena looked up to find Caleb standing a few feet away, his arms crossed, his expression more amused than annoyed. I'm fine, she said. You're stubborn, Caleb corrected. He crossed to her and picked up the bucket with ease. There's no shame in needing help. I don't want to need it, Elena said quietly. Caleb's expression softened. I know, but you do, for now. That'll change. He carried the bucket back to the cabin, and Elena followed, her pride bruised but her respect for this man growing despite herself. The day passed in a strange, quiet rhythm. Caleb worked outside, tending to the cattle and repairing a section of fence that had come loose in a recent storm. Elena stayed close to the cabin, keeping an eye on the children and trying to make herself useful by tidying the already tidy space. Thomas woke near midday, disoriented and weak but alert. Elena fed him broth and bread, and he ate slowly, his eyes tracking her movements with a wariness that made her heart ache. Where's the man? Thomas asked, his voice raspy. Mr. Turner? He's outside, working. He carried me, Thomas said. I remember. He did, Elena said, brushing hair from his forehead. He brought us here. We're safe now. Thomas nodded, then closed his eyes again, drifting back to sleep. By late afternoon, Caleb returned to the cabin, his shirt damp with sweat, his face shadowed with exhaustion. He washed at the pump outside, then came in and poured himself water from the bucket Elena had eventually managed to fill and carry. Kids all right? He asked. Thomas woke up. He ate a little. Elena hesitated, then added, He asked about you. Caleb's expression flickered with something she couldn't quite name. What'd you tell him? That you helped us. That we're safe. Caleb nodded and drank deeply. Then he set the cup down and turned to face her. We need to talk about what happens next. Elena's stomach tightened. She'd been dreading this conversation, knowing it had to come but wishing she could put it off just a little longer. All right, Caleb gestured to the table, and they sat across from each other, the space between them heavy with unspoken questions. You can't stay here indefinitely, Caleb said, his tone gentle but firm. I'm not asking you to leave tomorrow or even next week, but eventually you're going to need a plan. I know, Elena said quietly. The settlements aren't an option, not the way you were thinking. Caleb leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. But there's a town about 2 days' ride from here. It's small, but it's stable. Families, a church, a school. They might have work for someone willing to put in the effort. Elena's heart lifted slightly. What kind of work? Could be anything. Laundry, cooking, maybe helping at the general store. There's a widow there who runs a boarding house. She might take you on. And the children? They'd be safer there than anywhere else I can think of, Caleb said. There's a school teacher. Good woman. She'd look after them. Elena nodded slowly, hope and fear tangling in her chest. How would I get there? I'd take you, Caleb said. Once you're strong enough to travel, and once we're sure the kids can handle it. You'd do that? I said I would. Elena looked down at her hands, her throat tight. Why? You've already done so much, more than anyone had a right to expect. Caleb was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady. Because I know what it's like to have nothing, to be left with no options and no hope, and I know what it means when someone reaches out and pulls you back from the edge. Elena met his gaze, and for the first time since her husband died, she felt something other than despair. It wasn't hope, not quite, but it was close. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb nodded once, then stood. "Rest tonight. We'll talk more tomorrow." That night, after the children were asleep and the fire had burned low, Elena stood at the window and looked out over the darkened valley. The stars were bright and endless, scattered across the sky like scattered grain, and the air smelled of pine and earth and something clean she couldn't name. She thought about the town Caleb had described, about the possibility of work and safety, and a future that didn't end in dust and despair. She thought about this man who'd saved them for no reason other than it was the right thing to do. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they would be all right. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Elena woke to find Caleb already up, working in the corral with one of the horses. She dressed quickly and stepped outside, the cool air raising goosebumps on her arms. Caleb looked up as she approached, then nodded toward the horse. "Saddle broke yesterday. Fixing it before we need it." "For the trip to town?" Elena asked. "Eventually." Caleb ran a hand along the horse's flank, his movements calm and assured. "Not rushing you, just getting ready." Elena watched him work, the easy competence in his hands, the quiet patience in his posture. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Do you ever get lonely out here, by yourself?" Caleb paused, considering the question. "Sometimes, but I've got the work, the land, the cattle. It's enough." "Is it?" Elena asked softly. Caleb met her gaze, and something passed between them. An understanding, maybe, or a recognition of shared loss. "Most days," he said. Before Elena could respond, Lily came running out of the cabin, her face lit with excitement. "Mama! Tommy's awake and he wants breakfast, and can I go see the cows?" Elena couldn't help but smile. "Slow down, sweetheart, one thing at a time." Caleb's expression softened as he looked at Lily. "Tell your brother I'll have food ready in a few minutes. And yeah, you can see the cows. But only if your mama says it's all right." Lily turned pleading eyes to Elena, who hesitated, then nodded. "Stay close to Mr. Turner, and do exactly as he says." "I will!" Lily darted back inside, shouting the news to Thomas. Caleb finished with the saddle and straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. "She's got spirit." "She does," Elena said. "Sometimes I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse." "It's a blessing," Caleb said firmly. "Spirit's what keeps you alive when everything else wants to break you." He started toward the cabin, and Elena fell into step beside him. As they walked, she found herself watching him from the corner of her eye, this quiet man who'd become their unlikely savior. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know if the town would have work, if they'd be welcomed, if she could build a life from the ruins of everything she'd lost. But for now, in this moment, they were safe. They were fed. They were cared for. And that was more than she'd dared to hope for just 2 days ago. Inside the cabin, Thomas sat at the table, still pale but with color returning to his cheeks. When he saw Caleb, he smiled shyly. "Morning, Thomas," Caleb said. "Feeling better?" "Yes, sir," Thomas said softly. "Thank you for helping us." Caleb's expression gentled. "You're welcome, son." And as Elena watched her children eat breakfast in this stranger's home, surrounded by warmth and safety and unexpected kindness, she felt something shift inside her. Hope. Fragile and tentative, but real. And for the first time in months, she thought maybe they really would survive this after all. 3 days passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal, though Elena kept waiting for the fragile peace to shatter. Each morning she woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Caleb moving quietly through the cabin, preparing for the day's work. Each evening they gathered around the table for simple meals that felt like feasts after weeks of hunger. Thomas grew stronger by the day, his color returning, his voice losing that frightening rasp. Lily had already begun following Caleb around like a shadow whenever he allowed it, peppering him with questions about the cattle, the land, the mountains in the distance. And Caleb, to Elena's surprise, answered every question with patient seriousness, never once treating the girl like she was a nuisance. On the fourth morning, Elena woke early and found Caleb at the stove frying eggs. She moved to help, but he shook his head. "Sit," he said. "We need to talk." The words sent a chill through her, though his tone wasn't harsh. She poured herself coffee and sat at the table, her hands wrapped around the warm cup. Caleb brought the eggs to the table, along with fresh bread, then sat across from her. For a moment he said nothing, just studied his coffee as if reading answers in its dark surface. "I was planning to take you to town tomorrow," he said finally. "Get you settled with the widow I mentioned. See about work." Elena's stomach tightened. "All right. But something's come up." Caleb's jaw worked, and Elena saw tension in the set of his shoulders that hadn't been there before. "There's men coming, 3 of them, maybe 4. Been asking questions in the settlements about a woman and 2 children traveling alone." Elena's blood ran cold. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that make people nervous," Caleb said. "They're claiming to be looking for family, a sister-in-law and her kids. Said she ran off after her husband died, took money that wasn't hers." "That's a lie," Elena said, her voice sharp. "I never took anything. I had nothing to take." "I believe you," Caleb said calmly. "But they've got people believing them, and they're headed this way." Elena set her cup down with shaking hands. "Who are they? I don't know anyone out here. No one has any reason to—" She stopped, her mind racing back through the last desperate months. Then something clicked, cold and sickening. "The landlord." "What about him?" "After my husband died, the landlord said I owed back rent. 3 months' worth. But we'd paid. I had receipts." Elena's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "He took the house anyway. Said the receipts were forgeries, that I was trying to cheat him. I told him I'd report him to the authorities, and he laughed. Said no one would believe a widow over a property owner." "So he's sending men after you," Caleb said. "To what? Drag you back? Force you to work off a debt you don't owe?" "Or take the children," Elena whispered. The thought had haunted her nightmares for months. "He could claim I abandoned them, that I'm unfit. He could sell them to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Caleb's expression hardened into something cold and dangerous. "No one's taking your children." "You can't stop them," Elena said, desperation bleeding into her voice. "If they have papers, if they claim some legal right—" "I don't care what papers they have," Caleb said, his voice low and absolutely certain. "They're not taking your kids." Elena stared at him, torn between hope and terror. "They'll cause trouble. They'll hurt you if you get in their way. Let them try." "Caleb, listen to me." He leaned forward, his gray eyes boring into hers. "I've dealt with men like this before. Bullies who hide behind fake authority and prey on people who can't fight back. They're counting on you being alone and scared. But you're not alone anymore." Elena's throat closed. "Why are you doing this? You don't owe us anything. You could just—" "I could turn you out," Caleb said bluntly. "Send you on your way before they get here. That what you think I should do? It would be safer for you." "I didn't ask what would be safer," Caleb said. "I asked if that's what you think I should do." Elena looked down at her hands, tears burning her eyes. "No," she whispered, "but I can't ask you to risk yourself for us." "You're not asking. I'm choosing." Caleb stood and moved to the window, looking out over the valley. "They'll probably get here late today or tomorrow morning. When they do, you keep the children inside. Let me handle it." "What are you going to do?" "Talk first," Caleb said. "If they're reasonable, we'll clear this up quick. If they're not—" He turned back to face her, and the look in his eyes made her shiver. "Then they'll learn real fast that this is my land and I don't take kindly to threats." Before Elena could respond, the bedroom door opened and Thomas emerged, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Lily followed close behind, already chattering about something she'd dreamed. Caleb's expression shifted immediately, the hardness melting into something gentler. "Morning, you two. Hungry?" The children nodded and scrambled to the table. Elena served them eggs and bread with hands that barely shook, though her mind was racing with fear and something else she couldn't quite name. This man who'd saved them from the desert heat was now willing to stand between them and men who meant them harm. She didn't understand it, didn't know how to accept it, but she didn't have a choice. After breakfast, Caleb saddled his horse and rode out to check the far pasture. Elena watched him go, then turned her attention to the children, trying to keep them occupied and unaware of the danger closing in. She taught Lily how to mend a torn shirt, the girl's small fingers fumbling with the needle but determined to learn. Thomas sat nearby, playing with wooden blocks Caleb had carved years ago for children who'd never come to claim them. The sight of her son healthy and content made Elena's chest ache with gratitude and terror in equal measure. Caleb returned near midday, his expression grim. "They're coming. Saw dust on the east trail, maybe 2 hours out." Elena's hands stilled on the mending. "What do we do?" "You stay inside with the kids. No matter what you hear, you don't come out unless I call for you. Understand?" Caleb, understand? His voice was firm, but not unkind. "Yes," Elena whispered. He nodded, then crossed to a cupboard Elena hadn't noticed before and pulled out a rifle. He checked it with practiced efficiency, then set it beside the door. Lily looked up from her mending, her eyes wide. "Mr. Turner? Are we in trouble?" Caleb crouched down to her level. "No, sweetheart, but some men are coming who might want to cause problems. I need you and your brother to stay inside with your mama and be very quiet. Can you do that for me?" Lily nodded solemnly. "We'll be good." "I know you will." Caleb's expression softened, and he reached out to ruffle her hair. "You're brave, both of you, just like your mama." He stood and met Elena's gaze over the children's heads. Something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. Then he turned and walked outside, closing the door behind him. Elena gathered the children close, her heart hammering against her ribs. She moved them away from the windows and sat with them on the floor near the cold fireplace, trying to keep her voice steady as she told them stories to pass the time. But her ears were straining for sounds from outside, and her mind wouldn't stop spinning through terrible possibilities. The sound of horses came sooner than she expected. Multiple riders, their hoofbeats heavy on the packed earth. Elena's arms tightened around her children, and she pressed a finger to her lips. "Remember," she whispered, "very quiet." Through the window, she could see Caleb standing in front of the cabin, his stance relaxed but his hand resting casually near the rifle leaning against the porch post. 4 men rode into the yard, their horses tired and dusty. They were rough-looking, the kind of men who'd learned early that intimidation was easier than honest work. The lead rider was thick-shouldered and mean-eyed, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He reined in a few yards from Caleb and looked around the property with an assessing gaze that made Elena's skin crawl. "This your place?" the man asked. "It is," Caleb said evenly. "Name's Garrett. We're looking for someone. A woman, traveling with 2 young children. Heard she might have passed through this area. Who's asking?" "We are," Garrett said, irritation creeping into his voice. "Got a legal claim to bring her back east. She owes a debt." "That's so," Caleb said, his tone giving nothing away. "What's her name?" "Elena Brooks, widow. Brown hair, thin build. Her kids are about 6 and 4. Caleb was silent for a moment, and Elena held her breath. Then he said, "Haven't seen anyone matching that description?" Garrett's eyes narrowed. "You sure about that? We tracked her trail this way. Know she got off at a rail stop about 10 miles east of here." "Lot of people pass through," Caleb said. "Don't mean they end up here." One of the other men, younger and more aggressive, urged his horse forward. "Mind if we take a look around, just to be sure?" "I do mind," Caleb said, his voice hardening. "This is private property. You got no right to search it." "We got every right," Garrett said. "Legal papers say we can pursue recovery of stolen property and fugitives." "Well, she's not a fugitive," Caleb said, "and she didn't steal anything. You're chasing a woman who ran from a landlord trying to cheat her." Garrett's expression shifted, becoming cold and calculating. "So you have seen her?" Elena's heart sank. Caleb had made a mistake, let his anger slip, and now these men knew. But Caleb didn't flinch. "Didn't say that. I said I know what you're really after, and it's not justice." "Don't matter what you think you know," Garrett said. "You got 2 choices. Hand her over, or we come back with the sheriff and take her ourselves." "Sheriff's 3 days' ride from here," Caleb said calmly, "and by the time you get back, she'll be long gone, if she was ever here at all." The young man reached for the gun at his hip, but Garrett held up a hand, stopping him. Easy, Jake. No need for that yet. He turned his attention back to Caleb. You're making this harder than it needs to be, friend. We don't want trouble, just want what we came for. Then you're going to leave disappointed, Caleb said. Now get off my land. Garrett's jaw tightened. You're protecting a thief and a deadbeat. That makes you complicit. When we come back, we'll be taking you in too. You do what you need to do, Caleb said. But right now, you're trespassing. And out here, that gives me the right to defend my property. So I'll ask one more time. Get off my land. The tension in the yard stretched taut as a drawn bowstring. The four men exchanged glances, weighing their options. Elena could see the calculations in their eyes, the desire to push harder against the risk of facing down an armed man on his own territory. Finally, Garrett spat into the dust and gathered his reins. This ain't over. We'll be back. I'll be here, Caleb said. The men turned their horses and rode out, their departure less confident than their arrival. Elena watched through the window until they disappeared over the ridge, then sagged against the wall, her legs trembling. Caleb waited another minute before coming back inside. He set the rifle aside and crossed to where Elena sat with the children. They're gone, he said. For now, Elena said, her voice shaking. But they'll come back. You heard him. Let them, Caleb said. By then, you'll be somewhere safe. Elena looked up at him, confusion and fear warring in her chest. What do you mean? We leave tonight, Caleb said, soon as it's dark. I know a trail that cuts through the high country. It's rough, but it'll get us to town a day faster than the main route. Those men won't know about it. Tonight? But the children? We'll be fine, Caleb said firmly. Thomas is strong enough and Lily can ride. We'll go slow, take breaks when we need to. But we can't stay here. They'll be back with more men, and next time they might not bother talking first. Elena pressed her hands to her face, trying to think through the panic. This is my fault. I brought this to your door. You didn't bring anything, Caleb said. Those men chose to come here. They chose to threaten you and your kids. That's on them, not you. But you're in danger now because of me. Caleb crouched down in front of her, his gaze steady and unwavering. I made my choice when I stopped for you on that trail. I don't regret it, and I'm not going to stand by and let anyone hurt you or your children. So we're leaving tonight, and we're going to get you somewhere safe. That's the end of it. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to protest that he'd done enough, that he should protect himself instead of risking everything for strangers. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something that stopped the words in her throat. He meant it, every word. All right, she whispered, tonight. The afternoon passed in tense preparation. Caleb packed supplies while Elena gathered what few belongings they had. The children sensed the urgency and stayed quiet, helping where they could without being asked. As the sun sank toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Caleb saddled 2 horses and loaded them with carefully balanced packs. Elena will ride with Thomas, he said. Lily rides with me. We'll switch off if anyone gets too tired. Elena nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Darkness fell quickly in the mountains, and by the time full night arrived, stars blazed overhead like scattered diamonds. Caleb led the horses out quietly, avoiding the main trail and heading instead for a narrow track that wound up into the high country. Elena held Thomas in front of her, the boy's small body warm against her chest. Beside them, Caleb rode with Lily, the girl's head already drooping against his shoulder. They climbed in silence, the only sounds the soft footfalls of the horses and the whisper of wind through the pines. The trail was steep and treacherous in the darkness, but Caleb navigated it with sure confidence, never hesitating, never second-guessing. Hours passed. The moon rose, casting silver light over the landscape and making the path slightly easier to follow. Elena's body ached from holding Thomas steady, but she didn't complain, didn't dare break the careful quiet Caleb maintained. Near midnight, they reached a small clearing beside a creek that ran cold and fast over smooth stones. Caleb dismounted and helped Elena down, then spread blankets on the ground. We'll rest here a few hours, he said quietly. Let the horses recover. We've got another hard climb at dawn. Elena settled the children on the blankets, covering them against the mountain chill. They fell asleep almost instantly, exhausted from the journey. Caleb built a small fire, keeping it low and shielded by rocks so the light wouldn't carry far. Elena sat beside it, her hands stretched toward the warmth, and tried not to think about the men somewhere behind them. "How did you know about this trail?" she asked softly. "Used to run cattle through here years ago," Caleb said, "before I built the lower pastures. It's rough, but it cuts 2 days off the trip to town." "Will those men find it?" "Not likely. You have to know where to look." Caleb poked at the fire with a stick, his expression thoughtful. "And even if they do, we'll have enough of a lead that it won't matter." Elena nodded, wanting to believe him. "What happens when we get to town?" "I'll take you to Sarah Morrison. She's the widow I mentioned, runs a boarding house. She's tough but fair, and she'll give you work if you're willing to earn it." "And you?" Caleb looked up at her, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "I'll make sure you're settled. Make sure those men can't touch you." "Then what? You just go back to your ranch and pretend none of this happened?" "Something like that," Caleb said, but his voice lacked conviction. Elena studied him in the flickering light, this man who'd turned his life upside down for strangers. "Why did you really stop for us?" she asked. "And don't say it was just because someone helped you once. There's more to it than that." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. "My brother's daughters, the ones who died in the fever. They were about the same age as your kids, same dark hair, same eyes." He swallowed hard. "When I saw Thomas and Lily at that rail stop, for just a second, I thought—" He stopped, shaking his head. "Doesn't matter what I thought, but I couldn't leave them there, couldn't leave you." Elena's eyes burned with tears. "I'm sorry for your loss." "It was a long time ago," Caleb said, but the words were hollow. "Grief doesn't care about time," Elena said softly. "It just learns to sit quieter." Caleb met her gaze and something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, the shared knowledge of what it meant to lose everything and somehow keep walking anyway. "Get some rest," Caleb said finally. "We've got a hard day ahead." Elena lay down beside her children, pulling the blanket over all three of them. But sleep was a long time coming, and when it finally arrived, it was restless and full of shadows. They woke before dawn, the air cold enough to frost their breath. Caleb had the fire going and coffee ready, and they ate quickly before mounting up again. The second day's ride was harder than the first. The trail grew steeper, winding along cliff faces that made Elena's stomach clench with fear. But Caleb guided them through with steady hands and calm words, never once suggesting they couldn't make it. By late afternoon, they crested a final ridge, and spread out below them was a valley with a town nestled at its heart. Smoke rose from chimneys, and even from this distance, Elena could see people moving along the main street. "That's it," Caleb said. "That's home." Elena's breath caught. After weeks of running, of fear and desperation, here was the promise of safety, of a future. They descended slowly, and as they rode into town, people looked up from their work, curiosity playing on their faces. Caleb nodded to a few, exchanged brief words with others, but kept moving toward a large 2-story house at the edge of town. A woman stood on the porch, tall and gray-haired, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. When she saw Caleb, her expression softened. "Caleb Turner," she said. "What trouble have you brought me this time?" Caleb dismounted and helped Elena down. "Sarah Morrison. Meet Elena Brooks and her children. They need help. I'm hoping you can provide it." Sarah's gaze moved over Elena and the children, taking in their worn clothes and exhausted faces. Then she looked back at Caleb, one eyebrow raised. "You vouching for them?" "I am," Caleb said without hesitation. Sarah nodded slowly. "All right then. Bring them inside." And as Elena followed the stranger into the boarding house, her children clinging to her sides, she felt the first real flicker of hope she'd known in months. They were safe. For now, that was enough. Sarah Morrison's boarding house smelled of lye soap and fresh bread, the scent so wholesome and ordinary that Elena felt something inside her chest crack open. The front room was clean and well kept, with lace curtains on the windows and a braided rug covering worn floorboards. It was the kind of place that spoke of hard work and honest living, and Elena hadn't realized how desperately she'd needed to see such a place until this moment. Sarah led them through to a small sitting room and gestured for Elena to sit. Lily and Thomas pressed close to their mother's sides, their eyes wide and uncertain as they took in the unfamiliar surroundings. "Caleb," Sarah said, her voice carrying the weight of long friendship. "Why don't you see to the horses while I get acquainted with Mrs. Brooks and her children?" It wasn't a suggestion. Caleb met Elena's gaze, and she saw the question there. She nodded slightly, and he turned to leave, though his steps were reluctant. When the door closed behind him, Sarah settled into a rocking chair across from Elena and folded her hands in her lap. Her gaze was shrewd, but not unkind as she studied the bedraggled woman and children before her. "Caleb Turner doesn't bring people to my door unless there's good reason," Sarah said. "So why don't you tell me what kind of trouble you're running from?" Elena's first instinct was to deny everything, to hide behind pride and pretend she wasn't running at all. But something in Sarah's eyes stopped her. This woman had seen trouble before, had probably lived through more than her share of it. Lying would be pointless and insulting. So Elena told her everything: the fever that took her husband, the landlord's fraudulent claims, the desperate journey west chasing promises that didn't exist. She told her about the rail stop, about Caleb finding them half dead in the summer heat, about the men who'd come looking for her with papers that meant nothing and intentions that meant everything. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression unchanging until Elena finished. Then she was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. "Those men," Sarah said finally, "they have legal papers?" "The landlord might have forged something," Elena said. "He has connections back east. Money, people who owe him favors." "But you paid your rent," Sarah said. "I did. I have receipts, but he claimed they were fake, and no judge was going to take my word over his." Sarah's mouth pressed into a thin line. "No, I don't suppose they would." She stood and moved to a small desk in the corner, pulling out a piece of paper and a pen. "I know the territorial judge. He's a fair man, more fair than most. If we can get a sworn statement from you about what happened, about the receipts you had and the landlord's fraud, it might be enough to challenge any claim those men bring." Hope flared in Elena's chest, sharp and painful. "You think it would work?" "I think it's worth trying," Sarah said. "And in the meantime, you'll stay here. I've got a room upstairs that's been empty since my last boarder left. It's small, but it's clean. You and your children can have it." "I can't pay," Elena said, shame burning in her throat. "Not yet. But I can work. I'll do anything: laundry, cooking, cleaning, whatever you need." "I need a cook," Sarah said bluntly. "My last one ran off to get married 3 weeks ago, and I've been managing on my own since. If you can cook for 20 people 3 times a day, the room is yours, and you'll get a small wage besides." "I can cook," Elena said, her voice steadying with purpose. "I'm a good cook." "Then we have an agreement." Sarah extended her hand and Elena shook it, feeling the strength in the older woman's grip. The door opened and Caleb returned, his hat in his hands. Sarah turned to him with a raised eyebrow. "Horses settled?" "They are," Caleb said. "Elena?" "Mrs. Morrison has offered me work and a room," Elena said, and couldn't quite keep the tremor from her voice. "We're staying." Something flickered in Caleb's expression, relief mixed with something else Elena couldn't quite name. "That's good. That's real good." "Don't get too comfortable," Sarah said to Caleb. "I'll be needing your help too. Those men come looking for her. I want you here." "They won't get past me," Caleb said, and the quiet certainty in his voice sent a shiver down Elena's spine. Sarah showed them upstairs to a small room with a double bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the town's main street. It was simple and spare, but to Elena, it looked like heaven. "Get yourselves cleaned up," Sarah said. "Supper's at 6. I expect you at the table, ready to see how we do things around here." After she left, Elena sank onto the bed and pulled her children close. Lily was already half asleep, but Thomas looked up at his mother with eyes that seemed far too old for his young face. "Are we going to stay here, Mama?" he asked quietly. "Yes, sweetheart," Elena said, smoothing his hair. "We're going to stay." "What about the bad men?" Elena's throat tightened. "Mr. Turner and Mrs. Morrison won't let them hurt us. We're safe now." Thomas nodded, but his small hand gripped her dress tightly, and she knew he wouldn't believe it until days had passed without danger knocking at the door. That evening, Elena met the other boarders at supper. Most were working men from the lumber mill or the mining operations in the hills, rough-spoken but respectful in Sarah's presence. They nodded to Elena and the children, asked no prying questions, and focused on their food. Caleb sat at the far end of the table, quiet as always, but Elena felt his gaze on her throughout the meal. When she looked up and met his eyes, he gave her a small nod that somehow felt like a promise. After supper, Sarah took Elena into the kitchen and showed her where everything was kept, explaining the routine for meals and the preferences of the various boarders. Elena absorbed it all with desperate focus, determined to prove she could handle this, that she was worth the chance Sarah was giving her. When the kitchen was finally clean and quiet, Elena returned upstairs to find her children already asleep in the big bed, their faces peaceful in the lamplight. She stood watching them for a long moment, her heart so full it ached. A soft knock at the door made her turn. Caleb stood in the hallway, his hat in his hands, looking uncertain in a way she'd never seen him before. "Just wanted to check on you," he said quietly. "Make sure you had everything you needed." "We do," Elena said. "Thank you for everything." Caleb shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I'll be staying in town for a few days, just in case those men show up." "You don't have to do that. Your ranch can wait," Caleb said firmly. "This can't." Elena stepped closer, lowering her voice so she wouldn't wake the children. "Why are you doing this?" "Really?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything, and I know what it means when someone stands beside you anyway. That trapper who saved me, he didn't just give me water and food. He gave me hope. Made me believe that maybe the world wasn't all hard edges and cruelty, that maybe there was still some good left worth fighting for. And you're trying to do the same for us," Elena said softly. "I'm trying to do what's right," Caleb said. "Don't know if it's the same thing." Elena reached out and touched his arm, feeling the solid warmth of him beneath the worn fabric of his shirt. "It is, and I'll never forget it." Caleb covered her hand with his own, just for a moment, then stepped back. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He left before she could respond, his footsteps quiet on the stairs. Elena stood in the doorway, her hand still tingling from the brief contact, and wondered when this quiet cowboy had become someone she couldn't imagine facing the future without. The next 3 days passed in a blur of work and watchful waiting. Elena threw herself into cooking, rising before dawn to prepare breakfast for the boarders and working until late evening to clean up after supper. The work was hard and constant, but it felt good to be useful again, to earn her place instead of relying on charity. Sarah was a stern taskmaster, but a fair one, and Elena found herself learning not just how to cook for a crowd, but how to manage supplies, plan menus, and handle the endless small crises that arose in a boarding house. Lily started attending the small schoolhouse with the other children in town, and the change in her was immediate. She came home each afternoon full of stories about her teacher and the friends she was making, her face alight with a happiness Elena hadn't seen in months. Thomas was slower to settle, still clingy and fearful, but even he began to relax as the days passed without incident. Caleb spent time with the boy in the evenings, teaching him to carve simple shapes from scraps of wood, and Thomas bloomed under the quiet attention. Caleb himself stayed close, working odd jobs around town during the day and sleeping in Sarah's barn at night, despite her offers of a proper room. He was waiting, Elena knew, watching for the men who might still come. On the 4th day they arrived. Elena was in the kitchen preparing the midday meal when she heard raised voices from the street. Her hand stilled on the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. "They're here. 4 men. Just rode into town asking questions. Caleb's with them now." Elena's breath caught. "The children are safe at school," Sarah said, "and they'll stay there until this is settled. You need to stay inside." "I can't just hide while Caleb faces them alone," Elena protested. "You can, and you will," Sarah said firmly. "Caleb knows what he's doing, and if those men see you, it'll only make things worse." But Elena couldn't stay inside. She moved to the front window, staying back in the shadows, and watched as the confrontation unfolded in the street. Garrett sat on his horse in the center of town, his 3 companions flanking him. Townspeople had gathered at a cautious distance, drawn by the tension in the air, and standing between Garrett and Sarah's boarding house was Caleb, his stance relaxed but his eyes hard. "We know she's here," Garrett was saying, his voice carrying in the still air, "and we know you're hiding her. Hand her over and there won't be any trouble." "You've got no authority here," Caleb said calmly. "This is territorial land, and you're nothing but hired muscle for a fraudulent landlord." "We've got papers," Garrett said, pulling a folded document from his coat. "Legal claim to bring her back to settle her debts." "Let me see them," a new voice said, and Elena watched as a well-dressed man in his 50s stepped forward from the crowd. His bearing spoke of authority, and the way people made room for him confirmed it. "Judge Carlilele," Sarah murmured from behind Elena. "Good. This is what we need." The judge took the papers from Garrett and examined them carefully, his expression thoughtful. After a long moment, he looked up. "These papers are signed by a magistrate in Kansas," the judge said, "but they have no jurisdiction here, and the claims made in them are questionable at best." "That woman owes a debt," Garrett insisted. 3 months back rent. The landlord has every right. The landlord has the right to pursue his claim through proper legal channels in his own jurisdiction, the judge said coldly. Not to send armed men across territorial lines to harass a widow and her children. Mrs. Brooks has provided a sworn statement detailing the fraud committed against her, including evidence of paid rent that was subsequently disputed. Until a proper investigation can be conducted, these papers carry no weight in my territory. Garrett's face darkened. "You're obstructing justice." "I'm upholding it," the judge said. "Now you have 2 choices. You can leave peacefully, or I can have the marshal arrest you for harassment and attempted kidnapping. Which will it be?" Elena held her breath as Garrett's hand moved toward his gun, but before he could draw, Caleb's voice cut through the tension, low and dangerous. "Think real careful about your next move, because if you draw that weapon, you won't live to regret it." The certainty in Caleb's voice was absolute, and Garrett must have seen something in his eyes that convinced him. His hand moved away from the gun, and after a long, tense moment, he gathered his reins. "This isn't over," Garrett said. "Yes, it is," the judge said. "If you or anyone else comes back here making these fraudulent claims, I'll see to it that charges are filed not just against you, but against the landlord who sent you. Now get out of my town." Garrett spat into the dust, shot one last venomous look at Caleb, then wheeled his horse around. His men followed, and together they rode out of town at a gallop, leaving dust and silence in their wake. Elena sagged against the window frame, her legs suddenly weak. Sarah's hand on her shoulder steadied her. "It's over," Sarah said quietly. "They won't be back." Elena wanted to believe it, but fear had lived in her bones for so long she didn't know how to let it go. She watched as Caleb spoke briefly with the judge, then turned and walked toward the boarding house. When he came inside, his gaze found hers immediately. "You all right?" "I don't know," Elena said honestly. "Is it really over? Can we really stay?" "Judge Carlisle's word is law in this territory," Caleb said. "And he's made it clear you're under his protection now. Those men won't risk coming back." Elena's vision blurred with tears she'd been holding back for days. "I don't know how to thank you. Either of you." "Don't need thanks," Sarah said briskly, though her eyes were kind. "Just need you to keep cooking the way you have been. My boarders haven't eaten this well in months." Caleb's expression softened as he looked at Elena. "You're safe now, you and your kids. That's all that matters." But later, after the children had been collected from school and fed an early supper and put to bed, Elena found Caleb sitting on the boarding house porch, staring out at the mountains in the distance. She sat down beside him, the silence between them comfortable and familiar. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. "Ranch needs tending," Caleb said. "Can't leave it alone much longer." "When?" "Tomorrow morning." Elena's chest tightened. She'd known this was coming, known from the beginning that Caleb had his own life to return to, but knowing didn't make it easier. "The children will miss you," she said. "I'll come back to visit," Caleb said. "Town's not that far, and I need to buy supplies regular anyway." "Just the children?" Elena asked softly. Caleb turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. "What are you asking, Elena?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I just know that I don't want you to leave, and I don't think it's just because you saved us." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his gaze searching her face. "I'm not good at this," he said finally. "Saying what I feel. Never have been." "Then don't say it," Elena whispered. "Just tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm reading something into this that isn't there." "You're not wrong," Caleb said, his voice rough. "I felt it from the first day. Watching you stand there in the sun, ready to give up everything for your kids. The strength in you, the love. It made me remember what it felt like to want something more than just surviving." Elena's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "What do you want, Caleb?" He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "I want to come back here and see you, talk to you, get to know you the way people do when they're not just trying to survive. And then if you're willing, I want more than that." "What kind of more?" Elena asked, though she thought she knew. "The kind where I ask you to bring your kids out to the ranch sometimes, where they learn the land and the work, and maybe start to think of it as home. Where eventually, if things feel right, I ask you to stay. Not as guests, as family." Elena's breath caught. "Caleb, we barely know each other." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm not asking now. I'm asking for time, for the chance to court you proper, the way you deserve, the way I never learned how to do because I spent my whole life working land that didn't care about anything but sweat and blood." "You saved my children's lives," Elena said, her voice shaking. "You stood between me and men who wanted to destroy what little I had left. You gave me hope when I had nothing. I think I know you better than you realize." Caleb's hand tightened on hers. "Then say yes. Say I can come back. Say you'll give this a chance." "Yes," Elena whispered. "Yes to all of it." Caleb's smile was small and uncertain, but it transformed his face into something younger, something almost joyful. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, and Elena felt something inside her chest unfold like a flower opening to sun. They sat together on that porch until the stars came out, talking about nothing and everything, building the foundation of something that might, with time and patience and care, become unshakable. True to his word, Caleb left the next morning. But he returned 2 weeks later with supplies to sell and stayed for supper, charming Lily with stories about the ranch and teaching Thomas how to tie proper knots. He came back the week after that, and the week after that, until his visits became a rhythm Elena found herself counting days between. Slowly, carefully, they built something real. Elena learned that Caleb loved books, but rarely had time to read them, that he could play harmonica, but only when he thought no one was listening, that he had a scar on his left shoulder from a bull that had nearly killed him when he was 23. Caleb learned that Elena sang when she cooked, that she missed the ocean she'd seen once as a child, that she had a fierce temper when her children were threatened but infinite patience when they were learning. The children bloomed in the safety of the town and the regularity of Caleb's presence. Lily decided she wanted to be a rancher when she grew up, just like Mr. Turner, and begged him to teach her about cattle and horses and land management. Thomas, quieter and more careful, found peace in the wood carving Caleb taught him, his small hands learning to shape beauty from raw material. 6 months after that first desperate meeting on a dusty trail, Caleb asked Elena to marry him. He did it without flourish or grand gesture, just a quiet question asked over coffee after the children had gone to bed. "I don't have much to offer," he said. "Just a ranch that needs work and a heart that's been alone too long. But if you'll have me, I promise I'll spend every day trying to be worth the gift you'd be giving me." Elena didn't need to think about her answer. "Yes," she said, and felt the last piece of her broken heart settle into place. They married in the spring, with Sarah and the judge as witnesses and the children standing proud beside them. Elena wore a simple dress Sarah had helped her sew, and Caleb wore his best shirt, the one without patches. And when the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed her with a tenderness that made her believe in second chances. The ranch became home in ways Elena had never expected. She learned to love the vast spaces and the hard work, the quiet mornings and the star-filled nights. Lily took to ranch life like she'd been born to it, fearless and determined and absolutely certain she belonged there. Thomas grew stronger and braver, losing the frightened shadows in his eyes and replacing them with the steady confidence of a child who knew he was loved and safe. And Caleb, quiet and steady. Caleb proved to be exactly the man Elena had believed him to be. He loved her children as his own, loved her with a fierce devotion that never demanded but always gave, and built with her a life that was simple and hard and absolutely worth every struggle it took to get there. Years later, when Lily asked her mother how she'd known Caleb was the right man, Elena thought about all the easy answers she could give. She thought about his kindness, his strength, his unwavering commitment to doing what was right. But what she said was this: "Because when I had nothing, when I was ready to give up everything including myself to save you and your brother, he looked at all three of us and said no. He said if you were leaving, we were all leaving together. And then he kept that promise every single day after." That night, as Elena lay in bed beside her husband, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling around them, she thought about the woman she'd been on that dusty rail stop, that desperate, broken woman who'd believed she had to sacrifice herself to save her children. She was glad that woman had been wrong. She was glad Caleb Turner had refused to let her make that sacrifice. And she was grateful every single day for the life they'd built from the ashes of everything she'd lost. A life where no one was left behind, where love meant standing together through every storm, and where the word family meant exactly what it should: people who chose each other and kept choosing each other, no matter how hard the trail got. Outside, the summer stars blazed overhead, the same stars that had watched over them that first terrible night. But everything beneath them was different now, better, whole. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.